Or leave it at himself. Get a cue from you, madam. You're working for this thing. I'm going. It's still working for something. You're not going, but you know, you're trying to look at something.
Honourable members, when the suspension was taken, we were discussing order number 10, and to that we shall revert. Honourable member for the City of Bridgetown.
Thank you very much, Deputy Madam Speaker. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make my small contribution to this very important matter before the House today. Former mentor and friend, the late Dennis Johnson, always reminded me, ma'am, that the true judgment of a nation or the leadership of a nation is not what it does only for the majority or for votes, but how it treats to minorities, the disenfranchised, the disadvantaged. And I believe that on this occasion, I would leave it to the House, through you, ma'am, to the public, to the opposition, to the media, to not take my word for it in relation to what this administration or this government has done in relation to the most vulnerable among us. I would ask for them to do their own research and to answer their own question in relation to what this government has done in relation to the poor. I could talk about the One Family program, the work being done by the Ministry of People Empowerment, the Adopt a Family program, the various business interruption funds, the 40% increase. But don't take it from me, ma'am. I would like people to start going and see for yourself. Because as you would recognize, when you hold certain portfolios or certain places within the society, the skepticism increases. But everyone can go and look and see and read and hear and feel for oneself. One can answer his or her own question as to what this administration is doing for the most vulnerable, for single mothers, for children, for the elderly, and today for the disabled. Madam, the fact remains that with a minister in the office of the People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, with the heart of that minister, and with the dedication of the Honourable Member for St. James North, this country, this House, and the disabled community can feel rest assured that we will not only continue to bring policy, but that we will make practice of that policy. I say to the disabled community in this contribution, ma'am, I say rest assured, but don't rest on your laurels. Because a lot of work has been done, but a mighty lot more work has to be done. I've had the privilege of communicating with many persons from the community over the last few years. And one of the things I appreciate about them is that they've said to me on countless occasions how much work has been done, how much they appreciate the work that has been done, and how much they appreciate with the more work that needs to be done. And that they are prepared to be patient, they are prepared to give us the time needed. And I appreciate that. Because when you hold this post, you know that you come across a lot of people who want things done, and they want them done now. And they want them done yesterday. And they want them done like abracadabra. We cannot move too slow, but we cannot do everything at once immediately as well. And that is why we must walk hand in hand with our citizens, bringing them into our confidence, helping them to understand our timelines and our challenges, and the things that will prevent us from being able to deliver 100% of the time in quick order. But the reality is that there's movement in the right direction, and there is a path forward, as we can see, with a proper policy and a proper plan and a proper set of people and some politicians and parliamentarians in here committed to taking us on that path, so that one day that community can say we've reached the mountaintop. We've gained what we've come to gain. And I must commend the persons who have been in the fight many, many years. I've seen them in the gallery, and I've seen them commenting on social media and other places, commending this work. Not self-congratulatory just here being here today, but the community honorable member for St. James North. I have heard it, I've seen it, and I've felt it, the appreciation. As I acknowledge that we have somewhere to go, last week when we started this debate, I came a little earlier, ma'am, and for me, I had a bittersweet revelation. The bitter was that even although we're debating this disability or improving the lives of persons with disability, to get some of the wheelchairs around this facility was a little difficult. So I said we got to start at home. But it wouldn't be correct to say to start, because we already started already. So we have to improve our home. Because not only would one day persons within the community would be on these floors, but the reality is that one of us, one of these days, something could happen and we would have to be accommodated on these floors. So the work continues, ma'am, and that is the reality. The reality is we have to continue to take steps every single day in every single way to improve the lives of our people living with disabilities. The other thing I want to commend, ma'am, is I had the privilege of attending all but 2 of the public consultations and all but 1 of the outings that we had. And there's so many things that I can speak about, so many experiences that I can share with this chamber. But I would just share a few, ma'am. And one is, I commend the interest paid in their plight, because consultation after consultation was full. And it was not just full in number, in quantity, ma'am. It was full in quality of contribution. The interest paid gave even me as a policymaker that motivation to continue to fight and to keep the fire going and to keep the fire burning as we as an administration keep our promise to make a better life for all of our people. And those people are the people within the disabled community and all people in Barbados. I remember the outing at the beach. And I remember members of the community reminding me of like it was children at Christmas Day. Things that we take for granted. But the appreciation and the pleasure that they experienced as we spent the day at the beach reminds me of what a number of speakers spoke about here. That our job is not just about parts of a policy, but a holistic policy that ensures that this community is given pride of place when it comes to entertainment and recreation as well. And I share a story, as I like to do, from the parochial level of my constituency. When we first started this process, constituents came to me and said, I wasn't able to make the consultation, but I have a contribution, and my contribution will be made through my MP. And so done this evening. She said to me, I like the work that we are doing on various fronts. One of my concerns, and I called the Honourable Member for St. James North the same evening, she said, I would like my child to be able to enjoy simple recreations on places like the Atlantic Submarine and various things like that. Don't feel because we disabled that we don't want to go and enjoy these things too. So when you're writing your policy, don't forget that. So I called the chairman, the then chairman, and said, sir, don't forget that. Put that in there too. The sidewalks and all of that is good, but put it in there to ensure that the community can go and live and play and work and enjoy and be part of our society in every aspect. Bar none, ma'am, bar none. All and sundry, all inclusive. And I am very happy to say that as I look through the policy, as comprehensive and detailed as it is, it covers the parking, the built environment, the fully inclusive, the transport, education, being the two most raised thing in all the 76 consultations that we had. It covers that, ma'am. The businesses, the ability for jobs, social protection, and income protection, the increasing the standard of living, addressing the issues of health. It even looked at how do we get more persons living with disabilities involved in political and public life. It looks at disaster mitigation and disaster management, and recently looking at this whole idea of care leave, understanding that persons sometimes have to give up work to take care, and caregivers need leave, and caregivers need care, and they need respite, and they need various things as well. And ma'am, I am happy to report that the policy covers all of that. But even as we talk about the housing, the Honourable Member for St. George South indicated that in the first housing thing we opened this year, we ensured that the 20% was fulfilled. And I think one of the things the administration needs to be proud about is that even before the policy came, even before the law is passed, we made a decision, and it is not just a policy, it is a practice. And it was done, and we ensured that the disabled community got pride and place and got the keys first when it came to opening the housings in this community. So it's not just a policy on a paper, it is a practice. It is a promise made and a promise kept. And we should all be proud of that, ma'am. The other thing is, I think my colleague from Christchurch East Central last week made the comment that he was a little concerned that even as it comes to education, that sometimes we do not think that the community may be involved in other recreational activities. And I am happy to stand here today to let him know that I know personally through the Barbados Family Planning Association, because my wife is one of the facilitators, that goes to that association and teach sexual and reproductive health to the disabled community. Because when we talk about every aspect of life, we are talking about every aspect of life. So the member would be good to know and be informed that those sessions are done by the Barbados Family Planning Association, and I'm sure that their executive director, Mr. Anderson Langdon, could back me up on that. So in closing, ma'am, it is for me to say that the policy is here, the practice is here, the government has invested the money, we've increased the buses, we've increased the transport, we've increased the recreation, we've increased the time in terms of the educational policy for additional time for work. We've done a number of things. We've put the housing plan there. And at the end of the day, even within the area of law and order, we understand that the elderly and the disabled are particularly vulnerable to crime. And therefore, as we prepare our national crime prevention policies and plans, those are things also that we put in place. And the good old, it takes a village. If in our community, we must know who the elderly are, we must know who the disabled are, and we must make sure that within our neighborhood washes, our community posts, our community policemen know who they are, and we can check in as community people, as neighbors, as police officers, as justice of the peace, that we make sure that we secure our neighbors and we secure that community to the best of our ability. And that is why it is important that in here we continue the mantra and we continue to walk this walk and not just talk the talk, to ensure that we have a better life for all. And as a former member for St. Michael Southeast would say, let no obstacle be greater than the cause. Ma'am, I thank you.
I was going,
Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I was going to acquiesce to my younger colleague, but the member of Parliament who brought this beautiful legislation allowed me to say that, in the words of Tina Turner, the best. Simply the best will be the last. Simply the best will be the last. I just want to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I support unequivocally this policy, and to say that it is a policy that runs in concert with every single philosophy of this Barbados Labour Party. And I want to thank, first of all, the Member of Parliament for St. James North, who would have been integral in this policy, and of course, the Minister, my good friend from St. Michael South, who was responsible for piloting the policy in this August chamber. I want to say that, and I want to start with the quote of another good man, none other than the former Vice President of America. Interestingly, we know what is happening tonight. Most persons already predict. But a gentleman by the name of Hubert Humphrey. I don't know if it's any lineage, but the geneticists will be able to determine that at some point in time. Hubert Humphrey, he once said that the moral test of any government is how it treats to its most vulnerable. Those in the dawn of their life. You would have heard the minister, the Member of Parliament for St. Michael South, brought legislation in here to protect those in the dawn of their lives, the children. And he got full marks for that. Those in the twilight of their years, those that will cause my heart to fibrillate sometimes, the elderly, and how we will protect those persons in the twilight of their years. Again, Minister, the MP for St. Michael South, I give him full marks. And lastly, those in the shadows of their life, those who are ill for whatever reason, those who are needy. We have a lot of those. And lastly, those in the disabled community. I want to say today, with this policy, we no longer have to say that there are 20-something plus persons in this disabled community in Barbados who are living in any shadow. I want to say that this policy, in the words of Chris Rice himself, would allow us to take your candle and light up your world. It will allow those in the disabled community to illuminate their space. So no longer are you considered with a policy like this, which will roll out in concert with good legislation, no longer will you have to remain in the shadows of any space in this country, Barbados. You can now live, as is your right, the Barbadian dream, the dream that each one of us each one of us comes here at this parliament to represent the Barbados dream. I want to say that it is personal for me. It really is. And when you reflect, because you must look at the contrast. People talk about the lost decade, but in the last decade, it was not only education, it was not only 24 downgrades that spoke to a new grade of down. In this August chamber, we heard about sheep down too. We heard about sheep. But it is not only that, but Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think that you could recall better than me, we had a situation where in the NUPW building, persons with disability were placed in an area where you had to walk about 26 steps or so. An onerous task by any stretch of imagination. 26 steps. My good friend in my constituency in the Fulcrum of Christ Church, who I will speak to later, will count the amount of steps. He would tell me 24 or 25 or 26, so whatever it is, he will correct me. But about 26 steps to go so that they could get the attention that they need. And we thought that it was a cumbersome and onerous exercise for those persons. And the first order of business from this government, first order, and this was since 2008 or so. And the first order of business in 2018, we decided as a government that this is not the way how persons who are wheelchair users. I was made make that correction. I was titillated especially to make that correction. Wheelchair users, persons who use canes, persons who use canes, persons who have other physical challenges, who were not able to access, for whatever reason, to walk and step up 26 steps. We made a decision as a government to have the facility at Maxwellton, just near to the NS building, so that these persons could be accommodated in a humane way, and so that their needs, through the National Disabilities Unit, so that their needs could be satisfied. Because this is a government that responds to the needs of all persons, whether young, old, or disabled. And that is the mantra that we came to government with, a government that cares. And so we decided to put a facility, not only to accommodate the physical needs of persons with disabilities, but I must tell you, one that allows, because of the aesthetics, because of the natural environment, the natural built environment that allows for the balance of humors, so that you can have the holistic being built out. That is what we did as a government that cares. And further to that, I was asked, because persons in the community said to me, Minister, you have over 100 cleaning green sites. They know I love to deal with high numbers. You have 100 cleaning green sites. You have to get one for the disabled community too. And the August member who's sitting in the Hallow chair, who now I will refer to as the Deputy Speaker, said to me at the time, Minister, I'm asking you to provide a cleaning green space for those persons. And I want to say today, it is one of the most beautiful cleaning green spaces for those persons with disability. With swings and disabled friendly benches and what's not, we put there for those persons, because we understand that there must be a holistic built out of any environment that facilitates those persons with disabilities. I want to say, because it is personal for me, and it is no secret in Barbados, and when I extend my vocal cords to say this, I don't have to reflect on John 8 verses 44, which speaks to the devil being a liar. I'm not a liar. So I can say today that one of my best friends in the world, in the whole wide world, none other than I was looking for the member of parliament for St. George South, because he's not allowed to steal my thunder. My best friend in the world, none other than Mr. DJ himself. He allowed me to call his name, Madam Deputy Chair, so don't look at me And with any angst, he allowed me to call his name. I want to say to him, and please allow me to do what that which he had allowed me to do earlier. Prior to him having lunch, he may change his mouth now, because in Bajan parlance, he may got a belly full. And sometimes that affect your cerebral function. What I'm saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been an experience. After meeting this young gentleman, a person who is blind, Madam Deputy Chair, and the amazing things that he has done, I want to salute him. Today, I'm not singling him out because I believe that every single member of the disabled community has a special talent. It's just for us to nurture that talent and help it to grow and embrace it as part of a society that is supposed to care about one and all. And I'm just singling out him because from personal experience. I want to salute him today for not only being the six-time repeat or whatever you call champion for the blind community in terms of calypso competition, but for making the finals, of the Piccadilly Crop competition, which is open to everybody. And I want to say that I was at the fence. The time I was breaking down the fence, I had some type of kinetic type of behavior out there. But the point of the matter is that I was proud. The entire Christchurch West Central was proud, and we are proud of Mr. DJ and his achievements thus far. But he has taught me a lot. Sometimes he brings me into a sense, a very, very false sense of security. Unfortunately, that's so. Because I often walk around him, the entire community knows, for instance, that he is my friend and he's always with me. And I'm walking with Mr. DJ himself, and most of the times, I don't believe that I'm walking with some person who's blind. He will actually tell me there's a pothole there. And it gets me to the stage where I have a sensitivity to what he's experiencing, because he knows the pothole is there, because that is the way how his other senses work. He had a song called The Other Senses too. And they're working. And what I'm saying, the other senses allow him to know that after you take 10 steps of your house, there's a pothole there. Or there's a piece of bush there, or there's something he smells, there's a factory coming up. His other senses allow him to be able to traverse this country and do things where ordinary persons take for granted. And it allows me to understand that there must be sensitivities when we do things, when we operate within environments. When there's construction going on, reconstruction, when there are certain works being done within certain areas and in communities and whatnot, it tells me that we must inform the disabled community. Because he recognized that by having a pothole in a certain area after 26 steps, that his house is 26 steps from there. So when they fill that pothole, now what happen? It throws off his radar. So he should be informed. No, we take these things for granted. But we must inform those persons in the community about all the activities around them so they will understand their space. And so he has brought me to a level of sensitivity that I didn't have before. And I want to thank him for it, because it gives me another level of appreciation for persons with disabilities and the challenges that they encounter every day. And I want to say to him and to the rest of you all, continue the fight, continue to agitate, because he is a voice. And I'm saying to Mr. DJ, and to all persons in the disabled community, continue to be the voice and the advocate for persons like yourself and those that will come after. Because I had a personal experience, because I'm hearing a lot of personal experiences today, but I had a personal experience. In 2000, I was at home fixing up some bird cages, and a nail flew when I struck with the hammer and struck me in my eye. I had emergency surgery. And the morning when I got up, I recognized that both eyes were occluded because they had dressing on both to start the movement of eyes. And I went through a period of what you would say blindness, if you want to call it that, quote unquote, for a couple hours. It was one of the most fearful experiences in my life. I felt helpless, I must tell you. I felt shackled. I felt as vulnerable. I felt lost. All those emotions came together for me because it was a feeling that I have never experienced before. But what it told me that in a split second, a person could end up in the disabled category. In a split second, a person could add to that 21,000 or so, or 20-something thousand that we have recognized in this community in a split second. It can happen with an accident. The member of parliament spoke about his experience earlier, and he said to all and sundry that it was not because he imbibed anything, that is alcoholic or anything so. It was an incident with a light falling from his ceiling. And that could have caused him, he said, to lose his physical abilities. It can happen to each one of us. So this policy is not a fly-by-night exercise. It called for serious detail and analysis. It called for a lot of heart. It called for a lot of soul. It speaks to the DNA of this country. When we recognize that a space that is allocated for the disabled must be used only by the persons in the disabled community, irrespective of if that space is empty or not. And that all buildings, especially providing social services, government or otherwise, should be retrofitted for persons who use wheelchair users. And I tell them, Barbadians, not correct you before you're corrected by those 21 or so thousand people. Don't use wheelchair users. I am saying that we must be able to respect the language of those persons and the sensitivity and speak to the sensitivities of those persons who operate in that space. Because today is for you, and tomorrow maybe for me or vice versa, however you want to call it. Because, as I said just now, we do not know what is in store for us. So this is no laughing matter. This is a serious policy, and it is a policy that every single Barbadian, young, old, whoever, should embrace, because it is a policy that can affect us differently at any different aspect of our lives. I want to say, Madam Deputy Chair, in closing, that my ministry speaks about the environment. It looks invariably at how the environment has a relationship with entities. It has a relationship with ecosystems. And I want to say that the disabled community and climate change is something that I have spoken to the Member of Parliament for St. Michael's South. I intend to work closely with him because climate change affects those persons in the disabled community in a different way than it affects normal persons. And we can recognize, because those persons will tell you when there is a disaster, they are most vulnerable. Flooding, wildfires, is all over the world. Data would suggest that about there is a 4% or so in chance of increase as it relates to the vulnerability of persons with disability and the ability to access resources when they are faced with a disaster. Flooding, extreme heat, you name it. How persons in those communities adapt to the vagaries of climate change is a conversation that I intend, and we have started with my minister colleague, the Member of Parliament for St. Michael's South, and I will be a big part of that conversation because, and even disaster risk management for persons in that community. These are the type of conversation we need to have, because you will have to start looking at food security and the access to food, to health care, to all these things that are affected by climate change. I am saying that the persons in the disabled community, you all have my unreserved, unbridled, unequivocal, unmatched support as it relates. And I know that Mr. DJ will illiterate in sound as it relates to the support and to ensure that what we do in terms of building up our environment speak to the needs, the essential needs for those persons in terms of mitigation and adaptation to those members of the disabled community. I am happy today to be able to extend my vocal cords. I may not be able to sing as lustily as Mr. DJ himself. I may not be able to write a song that speaks to the other senses, but I know one sense that is working and that has worked for every single member of this August chamber is the sense that recognizes that this policy is the best policy to be able to protect those persons in the disabled community. And that other sense is common sense. I am obliged.
Member St. Michael North.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am happy that I can rise now without any other persons or any other members seeking to get up before me. And I'm happy to be able to make this contribution this afternoon. Not necessarily, but I'm very happy to be able to lend my voice to a very important discussion, and we call it a debate within this chamber. And even at the outset, I want to congratulate the various individuals who would have put in their blood, their sweat, their tears, all of their skills and talents into making what we are debating today, this resolution on the national policy for improving the lives of persons with disabilities possible. Of course, the minister himself, who would have led and piloted the bill in this honorable house and would have ensured that we were able to reach this point, the honorable member for St. Michael South, Madam Deputy Speaker, yourself, who would have played an integral role even as this policy and the intention of this administration to establish such a policy would have been communicated since 2018 when this administration first took office. I also want to acknowledge from the floor of this House the contribution of the honorable member for St. James North, who not only in this particular piece this resolution today and this work and report that has been presented to us, but even throughout his entire career and his life, and as long as I have known him for sure, has been a very strident and ardent advocate for persons living with disabilities in ensuring that they get a better deal within our country. I also, Madam Deputy Speaker, would like to acknowledge the contributions of Senator Boyce in the other place. And I go even further to acknowledge every single member of the disabled community, those many of whom are represented here over the last two sittings of this House. I want to, at this point in time, acknowledge every single stakeholder who has made a contribution to this resolution, to this report, and ultimately to this legislation. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I sat here over the last two sessions, I asked the question, why wouldn't a caring, progressive administration want to bring a resolution of this nature to this House? Why wouldn't a people-centric and humane government want to ensure that there were policies and legislation that included every grouping of persons, vulnerable or otherwise, within our society? And in particular, why wouldn't we want to ensure that as an administration, a progressive government, a forward-thinking government, an inclusive administration, why wouldn't we want to ensure that persons living with disabilities felt like they had not only a stake, but a place, a real place to be able to make a real contribution and difference in the land of their birth? Why wouldn't an administration see this as the normal thing and the right thing to do? And it caused me to reflect, Madam Deputy Speaker, on many things, but one of those quotes, and we've heard it in many different iterations today. But I believe the one that I want to focus on as I begin this contribution is the one in the way that Gandhi would have put it. And he said, the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. The great Mahatma Gandhi, he said the true measure of any society, that any grouping of persons can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. And Madam Deputy Speaker, there's no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure there's no doubt in the minds of all the members on this side, that this Barbados Labour Party administration has demonstrated time and time and time and time again that we are not only mindful of the most vulnerable amongst us, but we are constantly seeking wherever possible, Madam Deputy Speaker, to introduce policies, to introduce legislation, to bring to bear programs and initiatives that will improve their lives. After all, this is the administration that brought the Child Justice Bill, the Child Protection legislation. This is the administration that brought a policy just recently on aging to ensure additional protections and improve conditions for our mature citizens, yesterday's children. It was this administration in looking after the vulnerable that decriminalized vending so that they could ply their trade without fear. It was this administration that increased pensions, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was this administration that adjusted our tax structures to allow persons who are earning up to $25,000 not only to pay no income tax, but to also benefit from the reverse tax credit. It was also this administration in looking after the vulnerable to introduce the compensatory income tax credit for those between the $25,000 to the $35,000 tax thresholds. It was also this administration, this caring and loving administration, Madam Deputy Speaker, that increased welfare payments by 40%. All of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, while navigating the Burt Plan, the IMF-supported Burt Plan. This administration has not just taught the talk, but we have walked the walk relative to taking care of the most vulnerable in our society. Time and time again. And today, we are focusing on people living with disabilities. And again, my thought was, wouldn't any caring government do this? And I'm grateful to be a part of an administration that has allowed today to come, this day to come, where we are focusing and highlighting the fact that we want to ensure that all persons within our society, whether with a disability or without a disability, to feel included and to feel to be very much a part of what we are creating, a better life for our people. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have constituents who have varying forms of disability. I mean, all of us do. You really can't avoid it. We have so many different persons with different classifications of disabilities and different challenges across the spectrums. And as a Member of Parliament, I have had to deal with some of these matters on the behalf of my constituents, try to address some of their challenges, try to advocate for them in different circumstances, to try to improve the realities that they face on a daily basis. And I want, therefore, not only to speak as one who has a ministerial portfolio, but one who is a Member of Parliament first and foremost, to ensure that the people of St. Michael North know that they have a government that not only hears them, but a government that sees them and a government that feels them and is going to do whatever it takes to ensure that this environment that we are creating for them, make sure that they have a pride of place. And we're working to ensure that whether it is a temporary, short-term impairment, whether it is a long-term impairment, whether it be physical, mental, intellectual, developmental, or even sensory impairment, that every person counts and every single person matters. I link this now to a broader conversation on NCDs, and as I was thinking about the connection between our persons living with disabilities and NCDs, it came to my mind that there really is no difference, because NCDs, just like disabilities, is not a respect of persons. We have heard it mentioned many times in here, Madam Deputy Speaker, that any of us right now who considered ourselves to be abled and able-bodied, in the moment of a twinkling of the eye, can find ourselves on the other side having some form of disability. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, the fact of just living longer, which is the reality that we're facing now in an aging and aged society, the very reality of longer lives will necessarily and can necessarily produce greater instances of disability. So we need to ensure that the currently abled, the currently disabled, and those who may become disabled all have a place within our country. It is no surprise, Madam Deputy Speaker, that therefore that the policy that informs this resolution today had almost a pride of place relative to health and wellness. It was mentioned in many different areas, many different components, across many different documents. And ultimately, we believe very strongly in the Ministry of Health and Wellness that every citizen has a right to quality health care. Every citizen has a right to quality health care within this land of their birth. It continues to therefore be a goal of the senior minister in the other place and myself within the ministry, and I dare say the entire leadership of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, to ensure that we create an equitable system, an equitable, inclusive healthcare system that gives each and every one of our citizens that right to quality healthcare. And Madam Deputy Speaker, as I say that, I need to address something that is aligned with that. On a daily basis, you will listen to the various call-in programs and sometimes read the newspaper as well, the various media houses, etc. You would read and you would listen, and you would hear persons across the spectrum of our country raising concerns about the healthcare, the state of healthcare in Barbados. And typically, the concerns would usually center upon the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the accident and emergency in particular. But usually they will talk about it within the context of a healthcare system that is in shambles and that is collapsing and that is not working and is not functioning. And whilst, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will be the first to admit that there are several challenges within our healthcare network and our system that need to be addressed. There's no doubt about that. I would also be equally the first to celebrate the hard-working men and women across the length and breadth of our healthcare system who are making tremendous contributions and saving lives on a daily basis and providing exceptional healthcare to the men and women and children of this country, of ours. So whilst we acknowledge that there are challenges, whilst we acknowledge that there is a significant need for improvement, especially as it relates to those who live with disabilities, and all vulnerable groups for that matter, I want to be able today on this floor to say that I must defend and I must speak highly of the many women and men who go forward every single day to make a tremendous contribution and to serve the people of our country in our healthcare system, healing the sick, taking care of the young, taking care of the indigent, taking care of every one of us. All of us at some point in time may have to interface with our healthcare system, whether it be at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, whether it be at polyclinic, whether it even be at our private physician. And there are many people across this island who go to work every single day, well, whether they feel to or not, and they make their presence felt in delivering excellent and exceptional healthcare to our people. So let me provide some context on that note. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital is one cog, one part, one element, one component of a wider healthcare system that by all stretches of the imagination is functioning within our country. And I have some figures relative to utilization. Over the last 5 years, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, we have had over 78,000 people who have been admitted at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. In 5 years, 78,000 people, Madam Deputy Speaker, have received services at our Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Outpatient visits, persons who go in and out to receive various medical services. 448,000 people, Madam Deputy Speaker, have received services from our Queen Elizabeth Hospital over the last 5 years. That shows the tremendous utilization that takes place within that one institution. Tremendous levels of utilization. In fact, even as it comes from a budgetary perspective, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Ministry of Health and Wellness receives the second largest vote, which speaks to prioritization, which speaks to the amount of expenditure that the government is utilizing the revenues received to be able to ensure and shore up our healthcare delivery within our country. I move on because, as I said, the Queen Elizabeth is one aspect, but we go to the polyclinics as well, which would be our primary healthcare facilities. And over the last 5 years, we've had 1.5 million approximately visits to our polyclinics across the length and breadth of our country. In 5 years, 1.5 million utilizations of our polyclinic. I don't therefore subscribe to the view that our healthcare system is in shambles. 1.5 million visits, persons supported, that's persons who went there for diabetes and the treatment thereof. That's persons who went there with even the simplest of issues, a wound that needed to be dressed. That's persons that went there because they were having respiratory issues. Persons that went there because they had circulatory issues. All types and brands of medical situations have been dealt with throughout our healthcare system. And whilst we understand and acknowledge again that there are some difficulties and some challenges where we do believe and we admit that the level of care can be improved, I want to assure the people of Barbados, our healthcare system is working. It is working. It can be improved and it will be improved over time. But it is delivering to the people of Barbados day in and day out. 1.5 million visits at our polyclinics over the last 5 years alone. And therefore, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe that we can only get better from here. And specifically as it relates to the healthcare services that we provide to persons living with disabilities. I would like to share that we have allocated just over $40 million in our current year's budget. $40 million has been allocated across the Albert Cecil Graham Development Center and our psychiatric hospital alone for direct spending relative to providing services to citizens who live with disabilities. $40 million just across those two institutions alone. At our polyclinics, even more spending is seen and observed. And we provide many services there, in particular physiotherapy at our polyclinics. And I want to say to this honorable chamber that the number of physiotherapy appointments in polyclinics has been steadily increasing over the last few years. This is also a sign of the times. There are more persons who are becoming disabled, or even if it is for in a temporary circumstance or long-term circumstance, there are more persons who are attending polyclinics to receive physiotherapy. 1,222 appointments were given in 2019. 1,662 appointments for physiotherapy was observed in 2022. And Madam Deputy Speaker, 2,250 physiotherapy visits took place in the year 2023. 2,250 persons would have received physiotherapy during the course of 2023. Not only physiotherapy is a service that is offered at our polyclinics, but speech therapy as well. And this is a big one, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I must say to you that this one is also steadily increasing over the years. In 2019, we had 265 appointments for speech therapy. In 2022, we had 618 appointments for speech therapy. And in 2023, last year, we increased to a whopping 771 visits and appointments for speech therapy. So within the community of those living with disabilities, where physiotherapy and speech therapy are two of the core therapies that they would receive, as I said, whether it be for temporary disability or for long-term and permanent disability, we have seen a steady increase within our polyclinics for speech therapy and physiotherapy. I'd also need the chamber to know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we provide quarterly doctor's visits to persons living with disabilities. Quarterly doctor's visits are available to persons living with disabilities. In addition to that, we have district nurses across the various catchment areas in our country, where these district nurses will attend to persons who have wounds, assist in the preparation and sometimes administration of insulin, and they also check the vital signs of our persons living with disabilities as well. These are services that are already available to persons living with disabilities within our country. I go further, Madam Deputy Speaker, because even amongst the vulnerable grouping of persons who live with disabilities, you also have children who are living with disabilities. And these are especially catered to through our Albert Cecil Graham Development Center. This is funded by the Barbados government. It offers services to children from birth to 21 years of age. And I'm going to go through some of the various services that are offered, because I know that even though we have these things available to our people, and they have been available for many years, many of our citizens do not know. They're not fully aware of the various services that have been provided by various administrations over the years. At the Albert Cecil Graham Development Center, we provide occupational therapy. And this assists our children with being able to master certain skills, whether it be feeding, dressing, and grooming of themselves, fine motor skills, growth motor skills, and of course, their coordination, hand-eye and otherwise. Beyond occupational therapy, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have physical therapy that is done, again, physio. Speech therapy that's also offered there. And even as I mentioned speech therapy, we right now, and has been said, is not a secret, we have had a significant backlog. I believe it's just over 400 appointments or 400 persons that are right now waiting on a backlog for speech therapy services. And that is due to the fact that we right now only have one speech therapist within the entire public service. A travesty. We wish it were different. But unfortunately, it is what it is for now, and we're working to see how we can address that by bringing more persons in. We have also, even through this year and through the Ministry of Education, we have once again advertised for the National Development Scholarships relative to speech therapy as well. So we're trying as an administration, as policymakers, to see how we can attract more speech therapists into our system. And beyond that, since joining the ministry in January of this year and meeting with the team and the management at Albert Cecil Graham, I've been asking them, where can we find more persons, even within the private sphere, that may be able to give of their time as they give back almost to their nation, to their country. We've been looking outside of Barbados, and we've even turned our attention to inside of Barbados. And just recently we had conversations, I would say very fruitful and productive conversations, with the private speech therapists in Barbados. And some of them have favorably responded to the request that has been made of them to give consideration to bringing themselves, to giving of themselves and giving some of their services and hours, even if it was in a consultancy capacity or in a sessional capacity, and in some cases for free, to be able to provide hours where that more of these individuals who are right now sitting on that backlog can be seen, can be assessed, can be evaluated, and can receive speech therapy in our country. Madam Deputy Speaker. At the Albert Cecil Graham, we also provide audiology services, psychology services, social work as well. There's a medical department. There's, of course, a day nursery that takes care of our children from 0 to 5 years old. And for children who are 6 and over, there's school, where they go to school every day and they learn the same things that they will learn in any other school or any other educational facility, of course, catering to their various needs. And beyond the school age, let's say up to 16 or so, we have for our young adults, we have a workshop as well, where we're teaching our young persons who are living with disabilities vocational skills that they can use either for their own entrepreneurial pursuits, even for their own therapy, their own therapeutical engagement, or even just so that they can feel like they have a place within our society. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, within that one facility, you can see already that there are many services that cater to persons who live with disabilities. I move on very quickly, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the area of mental illness. And mental illness, of course, is recognized as a distinct category of disability within our country. And there's a lot of social stigma that is still associated with any kind of discourse relative to mental illness, mental health, and wellness. And this stigma, unfortunately, prevents persons who are living with disabilities or that are dealing with those mental illnesses, it prevents them from coming forward to seek assistance or seek any sort of support. It prevents them from seeking out these services that may be able to help them to improve on those mental illnesses that they're facing. And we believe as a foundation, when it comes to our mental health and mental illness, that there's a right to the access of mental health care in our country. And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are right now in the process of developing brand new mental health legislation, which explicitly grants every person in Barbados with the right to access to mental health care and treatment without discrimination, Madam Deputy Speaker, without discrimination, regardless of their race, their gender, their sex, their sexual orientation, their religion, their culture, their social or political beliefs, their class, their disability, or any other basis. So the new suite of legislation that we're bringing relative to mental illness in our country is going to be entirely non-discriminatory, and at its very core is going to be making it a right to access mental health care services within our country. The psychiatric hospital itself, Madam Deputy Speaker, is doing a fantastic job of providing support to persons who have mental illness. In 2023, we had 770 home visits, 643 clinic visits, 946 follow-up visits, and 749 clinics were physically seen at our assessment center at the psychiatric hospital. Those are large numbers, but they represent individual Barbadians who are at some point and some stage of life battling and dealing with some form of mental illness, and they were able to go to the psychiatric hospital to be able to receive services in those times of needs. It must also be noted, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Ministry of Health and Wellness in 2019, with assistance from the WHO and PAHO, we actually created the Barbados National Disability Health Policy. This is a policy that already exists within the Ministry of Health and Wellness within our island. And there's some key points that it would have gleaned and lifted from this national policy. One, accessibility to healthcare facilities, and you will see how it aligns very closely to what is being discussed in the report and in the same policy, in the same resolution that we're debating today. Accessibility to healthcare facilities. Two, assistive technologies and the use of such relative to persons living with disabilities. Three, healthcare worker training and the importance of having healthcare workers that know how to handle and how to work with various persons and various levels of disabilities that they will interface with. And five, mental health services. The policy acknowledges that that must be a right given to all persons. And what is the Ministry of Health doing, therefore, in these areas of focus and priority coming out of our own health policy internally, but also the policy that we are debating today and discussing today? One, relative to health services access. We want a Barbados and a Ministry of Health and Wellness that removes all barriers to health services. One, how are we doing that? By removing and reforming laws and creating health policies that will simply eliminate discrimination. Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, this in itself is a work in progress. Legislation that has been on the books in some cases for decades will take some time to review, will take some time to reform, but it is a work in process and progress. establishing dedicated disability health services across mental health, oral health, and NCDs, non-communicable diseases. It was mentioned here a few times about the difficulty that persons with disabilities have when it comes to receiving dental care. And we acknowledge that, and we do want to encourage and establish over time dedicated health services relative to oral health, non-communicable diseases, and mental health. I will say right now, as services that already exist, we do provide dental care free of cost for minors in our country. And when it comes to adults, we do provide extractions to them free of cost. Persons with disabilities are seen mostly with Honourable Winston Scott Polyclinic as it relates to dental services. And children who are a little bit more difficult to manage in terms of their ability to sit still or the discomfort that they experience when undertaking dental procedures, they are often seen by the QEH at our oral surgery service. And this is also done as a service on a monthly basis. Again, persons here may know of these services that are available, but the general public, I find, in interacting with my constituents, I find that in many cases they're not well aware of the many services that are available to them. Of course, there's work relative to our healthcare workers. We want to ensure that there's sensitivity training that is done, and even more specific training will be undertaken. And of course, I want to share what has been shared in the public domain many times. There is a massive renovation project that is being undertaken that is about to be commenced with our polyclinics across our healthcare system. And as they are renovated, and in some cases fully rebuilt, we are ensuring that accessibility to persons living with disability is a very prominent feature in the renovations and in the rebuilds of our polyclinics. Financing and affordability. This is the second item that we will focus on relative to health policy in our country. And we need to ensure that we advocate for reduced out-of-pocket expenses and costs for persons living with disabilities, and we want to enhance affordable health insurance options for these individuals in our society. And Madam Deputy Speaker, even as I say this, it has come to my attention that there are insurance companies, whether here in Barbados or even across the region, across the world, where there's a level of discrimination when it comes to persons living with disabilities. They consider them to be pre-existing conditions, and in some cases, they are hesitant and even refuse to offer insurance coverage, health insurance coverage, even life insurance coverage to persons living with disabilities. I therefore want to use this space and this time that I have to implore our various insurance providers in Barbados. There are many places across the world that have found creative policies and creative structures to policies that would allow for them to be able to incorporate and include and provide coverage for persons living with disabilities. There should not be a person living with disabilities in our country that is declined or discriminated against relative to health insurance in our country. It simply should not happen. So they need to think outside the box, find creative ways. If there's a challenge, find a solution. As one of the most honourable members who sat in this house would have said, face it and fix it. Whatever the challenge, face it and fix it. Wind it down, Madam Deputy Speaker. Number 3, social protection against abuse. And we're working closely with the NGOs. There are many NGOs that serve and work with persons with disabilities. And the Ministry of Health just in September would have had an NGO forum where we brought together those NGOs, many of them health focused, many of them working with persons with disabilities. And my team and I have met and have instructed the team to work with individual charities and NGOs now going forward to see how we can build out new policies, fresh policies that will better cater to our persons who are living with disabilities. I go on, Madam, as I close, to just highlight a few simple measures that I thought of as we've been looking at this conversation and having this conversation relative to persons with disabilities. And it has been said in different ways. But one, we need to look into ensuring that there's a way of letting persons know if their appointments, medical appointments, have been canceled. This is something that I heard coming out of the NGO forum first, when members of the hearing impaired community would have spoken. There are two things that would have come out in that NGO forum. One, not knowing when appointments were canceled, not being told in advance. And then two, sitting within the healthcare institution. And unfortunately, because they would not be able to hear when their name was called, being overlooked when their scheduled time and appointment was called. These are things that must become a thing of the past in our country. With the aid of technology, there's no reason why we cannot ensure that a person living with disabilities is alerted and informed well in advance of any changes to his or her scheduled appointment. An alert should come, a notification should come, an email, whatever it must be, to be able to let them know the doctor is not in today. Do not spend the taxi fare. Do not ask for the lift to come down to the polyclinic to sit down and wait for 2 or 3 hours, then to hear that the doctor is not in today. We need to do better as a country to ensure that persons with disabilities are notified if there are changes to their appointments. Number 2, seek to ensure that there's a dedicated window at the hospital and at every polyclinic to allow those with disabilities to be able to receive their medication, their pharmaceuticals in a speedy way. They are vulnerable. They are a vulnerable group, and therefore we can provide additional accommodation for them in such a simple way. Number 3, cadre of persons across all. There should be a cadre of persons across all healthcare institutions who can communicate through sign language, Madam Deputy Speaker, for those who are hearing impaired. All we have to do is train. If we train enough of them, you can have at least 1 or 2 persons on every shift, so that if a person comes into any healthcare institute or polyclinic, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, anywhere, that there will be somebody there who can be called at a moment's notice and can provide the sign language that is needed so that communication to that person is effective whilst they're there. Number 4, there are only 6, ma'am. I'll wind it down. Number 4, I believe that there need to be support groups and other psychological support services that will cater to those who are newly confronting disability. As I sat here, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thought to myself, there are persons who are born with disabilities and they learn how to shape their world because of being born with disabilities. But then there are persons who fall into disability as life goes on. And for them, that is almost like a culture shock. We must be able to provide as a government and as a caring administration, outside of policy, outside of legislation, we must provide support groups and other psychological support for persons who are newly encountering and confronting any form of disability. Number 5, as we look at accessibility and the question thereof, we need to ensure that all signage is disabled friendly. Signs should cater to the various stages and categories of visual impairment, height considerations for those who utilize wheelchairs and other mobility devices, audible signs, Madam Deputy Speaker, and equipment for those who are hearing impaired. So not just that we are putting in ramps or we're putting in the cutoffs or the cutouts so that persons can smoothly use their mobility devices across the platforms of Bridgetown, for example. But we need to ensure that signage, wherever it is found, also incorporates and is mindful of persons who are living with disabilities. And lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, we generally need to cater to the entire life cycle of persons living with disabilities. As I sat in my ministry and met with the team, the management team at the Albert Cecil Graham Development Center, realizing that that agency caters to persons with disabilities up to 21. I asked the management team in one of my management meetings with them, what happens to infrastructure that does not cater to the entire life cycle of persons who are living with disabilities? Yes, we cater to the children, which is good, but after 21 and all the way up to 100 years old and plus, we need to ensure that we have a fair, inclusive policy and system, healthcare and otherwise, socially and otherwise, educationally and otherwise, that takes care to the entire whole life cycle of persons who are living with disabilities, Madam Deputy Speaker. So, ma'am, with that, I give my unwavering and unswerving support to this policy. I believe it is not only important for persons who live with disabilities, but I believe that as an entire society, a caring, loving society, progressive and people-centric society, that we should all give our full support to policies such as this. And I thank you and I'm obliged to you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
You're most welcome. Honourable Member, the Michael South Central.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to add just a few thoughts to this debate on this very important policy. It is quite an interesting place to come in the debate. Having had two sessions of all the colleagues who spoke before me on all of the very important aspects of this policy. And many who spoke before me had personal stories. And it's good that we have personal stories. I have one or two. Before I share my story and what really resonates about this work that colleagues have been so engaged in, I think one of the very important things about this policy work and any policy work in which we engage is that it makes visible, and it has to make visible, the issues that we have to confront as policymakers, whether we have been personally affected by an issue or not. So it is important to share these stories, and I'm glad that we represent in this honorable place people who have not held ourselves apart from certain experiences. But the very, very important thing, the commitment that we make as policymakers, as we draft policy and then enact legislation and then enact practice, because as the Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Michael North East said in her intervention, it has to cascade down into the things that we actually do. But as we do that, the point of this policy work and the reason that it's so important to have cohesion across this work, across the child protection legislation, the population policy, and so on, is that we cannot have a society and a system of governance where it has to depend on what we have personally experienced. We have to make this work automatic so that the people who come after us find embedded in our expectations of them, our collective expectations of them, care and consideration and appropriate policy for all of us. Madam Deputy, I grew up with a mother who is something else. She used to work at Thelma Vaughan Memorial Home for some time as a caregiver. And my mother has this philosophy that we have to share, not just as the three girls in the house, we have to share with everybody. I remember, Madam Deputy, coming home from school one day, and I don't seek to make light of this, but this is a fact. I opened the side door, and I heard a voice that was strange. And I looked by the cabinet, you know the cabinet you just keep all the glassware that you're not supposed to drink from? I looked by the cabinet and I saw a prosthetic limb leaning up against the side of the cabinet. And I thought, well, that wasn't here when I left this morning. And I came inside the house and there was a young man that my mother had brought home for the weekend to stay with us. And, you know, the thing about growing up in my house was that you never knew what you were going to come home to in the evening. I remember there was a young woman in my community. I smiled because I saw her just recently, and her kids are old now, and time passes, Madam Deputy. But there's a young woman who became pregnant as a teenager, and she didn't have a good experience with her family. And one day, again, come home from school, and she's home by me. And her things are packed up in what used to be where my things went. And I think the philosophy that my mother had was, you don't get to separate yourself from the way that people have to live. You gotta share, but it wasn't just sharing with us. And we did not grow up with much at all. And there was a part of me that used to wonder, growing up in a working class family, there are times that, and I'm sure we probably articulated, my mother would say, okay, well, you're gonna get a little bit less to eat now, or you're gonna get a little bit less to eat this evening, but you ain't gonna starve, right? Because for her, and it wasn't even something she said to us, it was just something that she showed us. And she was so proud of that young man. His name was Anthony, he has since passed. But she was so proud of all he was able to do with his disability. He was a great cook. He loved music. He used to write music and sing. And we would come home with our accomplishments and she would say, yeah, but let me tell you about Anthony. Let me tell you what he did today, because for you all, I expect that. But for this young man who is so challenged, I feel extra special and extra happy when he achieves. And so I'm fortunate that that's the experience that my mother created for us. I think that this policy is important in acknowledging that this work is a conversation, a constant conversation, because a lot of what has to be done is not government that will literally execute it. It is businesses, it is community groups, it is households, it is individuals. And whether we help people who need it in a moment, whether we, in the way that we organize our lives and our business and the work that we do, acknowledge that there are people with different levels of capacity in every way. I was reviewing some of the measures that this government has enacted in support of people living with disabilities. And I'll go through them some of them very quickly. Many of them have been mentioned before, but I'm coming to a point. In the budget speech of this year, the Honourable Prime Minister, the member for St. Michael Northeast, announced some measures. A 75% tax credit for educational and life skills facilities for people with special needs, a 50% tax credit for centers for gifted people, a 50% tax credit for development of elder care facilities and hospices. And then she also mentioned in her own intervention the expansion of the category of disability to include some that we hadn't previously included, and also to include children having 50% of what would be the non-contributory amount. But as I was going through them, I stopped to consider the introduction of centers for gifted people. And the fact that capacity and capability is a spectrum along certain lines. So for example, my first godson has autism. And when he left Barbados and went overseas, he ended up being enrolled in a school for gifted people because he is gifted. He is gifted in a particular category. And I think that one of the things that we're coming to appreciate, and the Honourable members who work in education are probably starting to appreciate this more than any of us, that we have to be able to cater for different levels of capacity that are considered average, other than average, above average. So when we're talking about catering for different levels of capacity, and sometimes that means that you're talking about people whose talents have to be nurtured in a different kind of way. And I think it's an important thing to acknowledge, because often we think that what we are speaking to is individuals who somehow have gaps, what we consider gaps. We don't often think about individuals who have greater capacity than most of us. And so I think that one of the areas in which this policy will become very relevant is with respect to how do we enable all the different categories of gifts and how they present. Interestingly, my godson's stepfather is a wheelchair user. And he became a wheelchair user because he was on a job site and something fell on him and he became disabled, lost the regular use of his legs. He then became one of the top Paralympic athletes in his state and has been involved in different kinds of sporting activity that in both cases in that family, both with respect to my godson and with respect to his stepfather, happened to be in an environment that completely embraces and contributes to and invests in those special gifts. So yes, there's an extent to which we have to bring the existence and the actualization of people living with disabilities up to a level, but we also have to bring it past the level. Because in many cases, we are dealing with gifted people. We are dealing with people who may have a disability in one area and superior ability in another area. And I know that the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South is not going to be contained by an understanding of disability that keeps us only dealing with what we perceive as gaps, but will also take us to the place of what we could perceive as extreme attributes, from which the rest of us do not benefit, but that we have to make space for. Madam Deputy, I mentioned the population policy because I'm a big fan of policy cohesion, as is the member for St. Michael's South, whose bread and butter this area is. And I am reminded of the population policy that says that the post-independent social contract recognizes the state's obligation, and this is already a document of the House, recognizes the state's obligation to provide universal access to quality free education and training, quality universal healthcare, access to affordable land and housing, the protection of public spaces and the environment, respect for diversity, fundamental freedoms, rights and responsibilities, and equality under the law. Equality under the law is really what brings us here. Equality in all aspects of expression is really what we are discussing today. And so while it is important that we have this policy on people living with disabilities, it is also important that we bring that equality conversation to all of the work that we do, including in the population policy. And Madam Deputy Speaker, including in something that we all met to discuss again yesterday, which is Mission Barbados and the 6 missions to which we agreed. And I mention these policy documents because I think it is important to understand that we are not just addressing the lives of people living with disabilities in the context of a policy. We are addressing it in the context of every single thing that we do. And we have to be true to this policy in everything else that we're doing. So that we're not just coming back to say, oh wait, it was in the policy. It doesn't have to be in the policy. We have to do it because we are committed to equality of all persons. So when I look at the mission objectives, and in particular, when I look, and we have 6 mission objectives, when I look in particular at mission 2, transform Barbados into a country of active, involved citizens who feel empowered and engaged in the social, economic, and cultural development of the country as confident, creative, compassionate, and entrepreneurial citizens, we have to do that for people with disabilities. We may not have used that language in the policy, but we make a commitment to do that. When we say that at mission 4 is to create a society that prioritizes wellness and happiness, improve public health and safety, reduce non-communicable diseases, we are talking about bringing that as well, and especially to people living with disabilities. When we say at Mission 5, empower and enfranchise all Barbadian workers and families by creating opportunities for ownership and wealth creation, we are talking about people living with disabilities. So when we talk about generating or creating income earning opportunities, I want us to agree as a government, as a parliament, as a people, that we're now talking about going beyond income. We're going beyond wages. We're going beyond salary. We have to be able to create intergenerational wealth for people. We have to be able to create a situation where a family that includes people that have disabilities is able to generate enough wealth that the people that they leave behind, or if they're children in the household that have a disability, will be taken care of, will have access to those assets. So that this conversation that we're having here is about how do we apply these principles and these categories of activity to everything else that we're doing. So, Madam Deputy, for that reason, I want to then come to Mission 6. Transform Barbados to be a high-functioning, resilient society with seamless access to services and meaningful digital inclusion for all Barbadians. Madam Deputy, I've been having some conversations recently with some groups who are very interested, groups of people living with disabilities, who are very interested in this technology conversation, who are very interested in getting access to devices, getting access to hardware, but beyond that, being able to create a business, generate income and wealth from technology. It is really quite naturally one of the areas that aligns well with many people living with the kinds of physical disabilities that we see every day in Barbados. Because in many cases, it reduces the need to be able to move from point A to point B in order to carry out a task or to do your work. And that work can often be done in a very comfortable and safe environment. And so that if that individual chooses to leave, it might be for other reasons like recreation and so on, but that you do not have to leave in order to earn an income. And so for that reason, we've been developing a project. The Honourable Prime Minister made reference to the fact that estimates is coming, and I know that she will look favorably on the program when it is placed before her, because it is a program that seeks to enhance digital inclusion for people with disabilities by really focusing on a few things. One of those is training to be able to use devices, training to be able, in particular areas of technology that can generate income, so app development and these kinds of things. So that's one. But there's another one that we're very excited about. GovTech, which is the agency responsible for government technology in the ministry. And when I say for government technology, for being able to make sure that government services are available online, that essentially the full program of digital transformation of government is seamlessly led and executed. And soon GovTech will launch a developers hub. Now that developers hub will not only include a specific call for developers with disabilities, but also a specific call for developers that are working on assistive technology. So you will have a special category and a special prize if you are developing assistive technology for people living with disabilities. Madam Deputy, we know that technology, but AI technology in particular, is really changing the provision of disability support. Data coming out of the UN estimate that over 1.5 billion people worldwide are being helped by particular types of technology that assist with hearing loss or that help mitigate hearing loss in at least one ear. So those individuals have been have benefited from new technology through AI-powered devices that offer features like speech-to-text transcription, sound identification, using inputs to separate different sounds, and so on. We believe, and I say we, I mean those who work now in the technology industry, that AI potentially holds the key to be able to really transform accessibility for people living with disability. But the reason that we are building a data center and that this small Barbados is focused on AI technology and data analytics and being able to apply large language models and other models to the data that we collect is that for us it is not a video game. For us it is not play, as the old people say. For us it is about solving the problems that we have. And so when, as part of our developers hub, we send out a call to people who are building applications and so on, we want to hear in Barbados, we're not waiting for other people to build it and bring it to us. Surely, if we say in this policy that we are concerned with improving accessibility and digital inclusion for people living with disabilities, our own developers must be part of that conversation. Our own developers must be among the technologists who are helping to build these kinds of technologies. And so when the Developers Hub launches next year, this will be one of the special calls that you see. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to say a little bit about the data center and the Data Analytics Authority. The truth is that there's a lot that we do not know and understand about many categories of disability. Often when we collect information, we ask some people living with disabilities to fit into a box and to tick something and say, well, I have this or that or that. And if you don't fit into this or that, well, we don't know much about you. So a lot of the work that we intend to do as part of the Data Analytics Authority, and the honourable member in the other place who's responsible for economic affairs is sharing that task with me, is to be able to use different kinds of information that is shared in different places by people living with disabilities, to be able to build a better profile of what we need to respond to and what we need to support. One of the things that this policy speaks to, and the population policy speaks to, and others, is that we're talking about a few things here when we talk about different populations of people. It is actualization. So how are people really living their full selves and their full lives? And it's also about care. And we have to invest equally in both. There used to be a time when people in Barbados thought that people with disabilities only needed care. That when you're talking about disability, you're talking only about care. But the truth is that, well, we don't only need care. People, human beings, have all kinds of needs. And I'll leave the sociologists and social policy people to talk about hierarchy of needs and all that. But we know, because we live the experience, we know what we need. We know, and that's why we talk in the mission framework about the idea of happiness, of prosperity. So this policy goes beyond care, although it does invest in care, to go to actualization and ensuring that we support people's productive capacities in every way. That's a challenge. It is a challenge. I mean, this government has, I dare say, gone much further than any other in being able to make visible, to take measures, and to really get on the path that will take us there. But I say it as a challenge because I want us to understand that we can't take our eyes off the ball. We can't say, okay, well, we've done this. Good. All right. Everybody have a good night. Work now start. I take this policy and the people whom I serve in this role as a challenge to deliver in the sectors in which I work. Industrial policy, in particular, is one of those. You know, we had a lot of conversation this week about what is the kind of incentive framework that will bring about the kind of country that we want. And that's one of the reasons that we've seen, for example, these tax credits and other incentives that you see. But we have to do more than that. We have to make sure that when we set out an industrial policy, as the Ministry of Industry is doing now, that the groups that we have to specially consider are not added as an afterthought. That we make sure that we are positively considering and executing a policy and a set of strategies that are going to mean that all of us are able to benefit and to see the value of the missions that we have set. The member who spoke before me talked about the life cycle of people living with disabilities, but beyond that, and I know that the Ministry of People Empowerment does have a life cycle approach to social protection. And if you have a life cycle approach to social protection, it means that being able to respond to and serve people with disabilities is part of your life cycle approach as well. Because in many ways, potentially having a disability is a part of that life cycle, and it can happen at any point. And the point is in designing policy to be able to make sure that you have an automatic safety net and a set of policies that respond to any one of us being in that position at any point. I talked about how we all have stories, and I also talked about the importance of not needing a story. But we all have them, and perhaps that keeps us humble. In 2015, I got Zika. And I thought, well, this was easy. I had a couple weeks of feeling a bit low, and then I thought that was over. One Sunday afternoon, I was at home alone, and I got up to go and grab the phone from somewhere or something. And I realized that I was walking and my left leg was not following me. And because I'm one of those Google search, self-diagnosing doctors, I knew immediately what it was. I knew that it was a neuritis that was an aftermath of Zika, and that it was potentially going to evolve into something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which in many cases causes paralysis. Immediately, I started to think. You know, I'm running to the phone, I'm thinking, okay, I have a neurologist number on my phone, I'm gonna call him, because I know it moves quickly, and it did. But immediately I started thinking of the changes that I would need to make to my life. I thought, okay, I've seen this, I've read about this. People end up being wheelchair users for a certain amount of time. There's this level of amount of physiotherapy, there's this. And I started immediately thinking about, well, what is there around me that supports that? What do I have to do? How will my life change? And it was such a surreal moment because most people who know me know that I have dogs to whom I'm very attached. And one of my dogs saw the very strange reaction that my body was making, and she ran behind me, and she is over 100 pounds, and she used her weight to hold me up because she saw that I was about to fall. And I just started thinking, oh my goodness, well, who's gonna care for this, and who's gonna care for that, and who's gonna look after? And, you know, it was so immediate, the reality of potentially having a period of time or a part of your life with a disability. But what you start to do is you start to think about what is there around you that can enable the life that you want to live. And this policy is here because any of us could easily have that story, but we shouldn't have to have that story. We shouldn't have to have that story. I suppose the thing that I feel more grateful for, other than the experience with Zika, is the earlier experience that my mother gave us. I feel more grateful for that. Because I think that experience was about everyday integration among each other. We live our lives together. And as we live our lives together, if we want to build a society based on solidarity, that's all this is about. This is not about getting any special kudos for caring for our neighbors. This is about doing what we have to do to take care of all of us. This is us. I am because you are. And so, Madam Deputy, I'm very thankful that this policy is here. I salute the teams of individuals from the community of people living with disabilities, the minister, the member for St. Michael South, the member for St. James North, the member for the city of Bridgetown, you, Madam Deputy Speaker, who initiated this work. I salute and I acknowledge that work, but I also know that there's far more to be done that has to be carried by each of us. I commit to do that in the ministry I have the honor to lead, and I commit to supporting all from the community who we are committed to support. We are bound to support in this work that we do. Madam Deputy, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable member for St. Michael South.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to begin as I began when I introduced this speech, this policy. And I want to thank all the members who spoke as well. I really feel, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I could not begin this very brief wrap-up, very, very brief, and not thank again the Honourable Member for St. James North to begin with. His leadership in this regard, the seriousness with which he approached the job as chairman of the committee, ma'am, is one that I will remember for a very long time. I want to begin by thanking the Honourable Member for St. James North, because he did a lot of work to bring us here, and I really mean that. I also want to thank him for his friendship along the way. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to thank the Honourable Prime Minister for her support in making sure that the ministry is well-resourced to be able to do a number of the things that we have set out to do and have been able to do over the course of the last few years. You know, the support of the Prime Minister doesn't come just like that. There are questions that are asked and have to be answered, as was the case a few minutes ago in relation to some of the things that we should know, and the need for the government of Barbados, particularly this ministry, to not only have data, but to use that data as information to make policy and to be able to use that information wisely. But I do want to thank the Prime Minister for her support, and as you heard during the course of her presentation, for the other gifts that were bestowed on us in the Ministry of People Empowerment, particularly National Disabilities Unit, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also want to thank the community of persons with disabilities for the support that we have had over the last 2 weeks, last 2 Tuesdays. And I do so because I recognize that it is, it's nothing to take for granted when persons leave whatever it is that they have to do and spend 2 full days in the parliament listening to politicians talk. I do not take it for granted, but it says to me that it is important work and that therefore they feel the need to be here while we do this work. I really want to thank the community. I had posted on my social media that we were able to do this policy and we did not get a lot of pushback, and somebody responded and said to me, you can't push back on your own work. because they felt very integrated into the whole policy before the policy came here due to the work that was done by the member for St. James North. I want to thank you, Madam Deputy, for your leadership of the ministry and giving me a platform on which I could come and do some of these things that we are now delivering in my time. But I want to thank you. And of course, all of my colleagues, again, who spoke so well. I couldn't even single out anybody. All of my colleagues who spoke so well on this policy, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm so proud to be part of a government that has taken this thing seriously. And this is serious work. And I'm very proud of the government. And I'm also proud, Madam Deputy Speaker, because, there's a time and place for everything. But I also want to thank the opposition leader for recognizing that this is bigger than partisan politics, and that we must be able to deliver on behalf of the people of this country who need for us to be focused and to be adults when it's time for us to behave like adults in a room. Madam Deputy Speaker, I feel that the time has come for us to take ourselves in some ways out the equation, A lot of us are driven by the pursuits that suit ourselves, but there is a community of people that we really have to serve. And I say so beginning really and truly by looking at what the policy says and what the bill presents. And I want to begin with employment only because I know that is perhaps the one area that we may have to have conversations. But we recognize that with 90% of a community unemployed, that the legislation must speak to it. The legislation must speak to what we will do to be able to offer persons with disabilities employment. And I said in my opening that the only place for persons with disabilities to work cannot be the Ministry of People Empowerment, or we missed the boat. And I want to commend my colleagues, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister made it very clear, and it was a point I was going to make anyway, that based on the work that is outlined in the policy, and based on the work that is outlined in the legislation, each of our ministries must now go back and review our estimates and make sure that what we have in the estimates will be able to be in sync with what it is that we say we're going to do in the policy. Because the policy and the draft legislation goes through each ministry one by one. And every single ministry will now have certain things that they have to do. There is a psalm, most of us know it through the Bonnie M song, by the rivers of Babylon, but it's Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, where I sat down, people know this song. There we wept when we remembered Zion. But in that psalm and in that song, they're asking people to sing songs in a place where they can't recognize, in a place where they feel no kinship, where they dream of a place they knew, of a better place. And I feel as if we have asked for too long the persons with disabilities to come and to sing songs to in a land that they couldn't recognize. It could not be the promised land for them. And this policy only creates the surface of what it is that we have to do, Madam Deputy Speaker. We cannot ask people to come and feel part of a bigger picture when the things that we do make them feel small. I saw just yesterday somebody sent me a picture of a police vehicle parked in a disabled spot. Forwarded many times so Beijing know now that it ain't right. There's certain things that we have to stop. And this idea that we can park, and that's not the only MP vehicle to do it. Many MP vehicles do it as if they think they have a right to trample on the rights of persons with disabilities. It has to stop, Madam Deputy Speaker. But there are many little things that are happening in this country that tell me that I know if I were a person with a disability, that this would still be a strange land. And we know it is a strange land because at the end of the day, until we fix education so that persons who have disabilities or the children feel that they can benefit from education, it has to be a strange land. It has to be a strange land. If it is that in relation to health care, persons with disabilities do not feel they're getting a fair shake. And I'm happy to hear some of the things proposed and said by the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Health, Madam Deputy Speaker. But it is a strange land. And none of us would want to feel as we are strangers in our own land. So it has to change. Madam Deputy Speaker, the psalm goes on to say, if I forget you, may my right hand forget its skill. And if I forget you, may my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. Madam Deputy Speaker, if it is that we say these things and then we forget, may we all forget our skills. May all of our tongues cling to the roofs of our mouth. Because we have to say what we are going to do and then do what we say we are going to do. That is the Labour Party way. That is what we have to do. So all of us have to go back and check our estimates and make sure the things that are in our estimates reflect the things that we agreed upon in this place, Madam Deputy Speaker. You know, I'm not a kind of person, I don't need a lot of things. I've always been unimpressed with excess. I don't need a lot of things. Most of us don't. But I do believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are certain little things that bring a person joy. I remember just last year, Chris, permit me to say Chris and I, and permit me also to say Roseanne Trudeau, we were in New York. We went for pizza after, when I'm in New York after a meeting, is the hotel room, the meeting, back to the hotel. I don't hang out, I don't have time for that. You know, you're too tired, the days go by so fast, and New York is cold most of the time we're there. But I remember going for pizza. I remember having a drink. One of my fondest memories, Chris may not know, is Chris doesn't allow anybody to push him, but he allowed me to push him in New York. He didn't allow me to push him in Barbados, but he allowed me to push him in New York. So they're little things, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank him for giving me the opportunity so to do. And I say so because I spoke of Craig last time I spoke, Craig Nurse. And I remember him sitting at the bottom of the university steps in his chair, waiting for somebody to pick him up the stairs, and he waited for somebody he trusted. Not everybody, he asked me to do it because he trusted me. These things tell me, Madam Deputy, that we have to build a society that is based around trust. And I cannot blame the persons with disabilities if they feel that they cannot trust many people, because people who know better should do better. And that in every possible way, we've let the community down. This bill, this policy only now begins to reverse, hopefully, some of the injustices that we have inflicted on persons with disability. And Madam Chair, a lot of work now has to be done. I hold before me, Madam Deputy Speaker, the draft bill. I'm not going to read from it, so I don't need to make it a document. But this is the draft bill. 75 pages, I hope to progress. And it is my solemn promise that we will have this bill back in this place before the end of December. If I have my way, we will have this bill to be debated, or at least to be laid, on December 3rd, which incidentally falls on a Tuesday, and is International Day for Persons with Disabilities. That would make a lot of sense. And so those two disability advocates who work in the ministry, whose job it is to make sure that we have this bill back in the shortest possible time, remember December 3rd. Remember December 3rd. It would be a good, fitting conclusion to be able to lay the bill on such a monumental day. Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I feel as if at the end of the day, we have to be very, 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 very careful about the things that we say and the things that we do, only because these are real people. These are real people. I have a constituent who, healthy, happy young boy, doing backflips on the beach. And that was it. Now he's a quadriplegic. And we should all, yes, just doing backflips a regular day, and he missed. I mean, perfectly doing these backflips for all to see, and then just one day just got it wrong. And his life changed for the rest of his life. But his parents love him. I mean, they love him. If you go to the house, you could feel the love, and because of the love, you could see how that helps him. So I know that if love can help, the taking away of love can hurt. And our society, therefore, by its actions, continue to hurt people with disabilities. I also have another person with disabilities, Madam Deputy Chair, another quadriplegic. The ministry just employed him to work in finance. He was on his way to Polytechnic, and a ZR man, because he was in a hurry to put a battery in his phone or something, overtook 3 cars and rammed him onto a wall. We have to take ourselves out of the equation. The problem with Barbados and a lot of these things is that people prioritize themselves. But that young man went on to university and has a first-class honors degree. He has not allowed any disability to define him, but I still believe that education has to change. It should not be so hard for persons with disabilities to get a proper education. And we just employed him in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, and I know he's going to go on and do extremely well, Madam Deputy Speaker. He's an outstanding young man. He has the greatest support of the Director of the Wellbeing and HIV Commission, and he'll be working in that unit. But we have many persons who are in that category, Madam Deputy Speaker. I look forward to being able to work with him, but we want to use these persons, Madam Deputy Speaker, to show Barbados what is possible with a little bit of support. A little bit of support. I feel like the ministry has to get it right. I think the amalgamation is essential to that. That is why we're driving the amalgamation so hard. I feel that if we can get the amalgamated social services working, when you go to a household, you go and you ask for the grandmother, and then you get to understand what's happening with persons with disabilities, with children, a total service. What we often know as a fragmented service. This total service is necessary to be able to do the work. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have the draft legislation. We fine-tuned that as well, and hopefully we can lay that again this year also to be able to have an amalgamated entity that allows us to speak to the total person, Madam Deputy Speaker. Because once we do that, once we can address families holistically, we can begin to replace or fill the gap with love. Because, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. And if a vacuum exists in nature, something will either rise or something will fall to fill its place. We have in the ministry to fill the place that the vacuum somehow now has been created. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister just gave us 2 gifts. And I want to thank her again, but I also feel as if I need to say to the ministry, we now have the opportunity to build a respite facility for persons with disabilities and their caregivers. And I want to say that again because we've been asking for it for a long time. And we just got a commitment from the Prime Minister and a directive to begin building by next year a respite facility for persons with disabilities. This is a big deal, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a big deal. Just the other day, I spent at an AGM meeting of the Autism Association. I just spent a couple hours, and I saw women, mostly women, some men, but mostly women, having to deal with grown adults who behave like children because that's the developmental stage that they're at. Bigger than me. Some boys with autism, bigger than me. And mothers having to pick them up off the floor. Physically telling me I have to do this 20 times a day sometimes to lift my adult-looking 2-year-old son mentally in terms of capacity off the floor. Those women do not have the opportunity to go and work the way regular people have, people have the opportunity to go and work. We have to fill that gap. If there's one space where we have to do better, we have to fill that gap. The funds that are being made available to the parents of the children is a big deal because it allows them to be able to make what we take for granted, just to be able to make ends meet, Madam Deputy Speaker. That respite facility is a big deal. And we intend to do that first one at Sterling, all things being equal. But those who have responsibility for the day-to-day work now must know that if we got permission today to start that work, that tomorrow they have to go and check Sterling. My permanent secretary must be listening. Tomorrow to go and check Sterling. We already have the site plan because we did the work. We did the work at Sterling for the elderly. We have the site plan. Go and visit the place and tell me by the end of the week where we're going to begin this building. Because you can't get a gift and then play a look in the gift horse in the mouth. We have to make sure we build out this facility. The other thing that we received today, Madam Deputy Speaker, another gift, was a facility for older persons with disabilities. I was manager of the Child Care Board for 5 years. And at the time, the facility for persons with disabilities was at Haynesville, in the Honourable constituency for the Honourable member for St. James South. And that facility now is at Nightingale. But in that facility, they have children who are genuinely children. But because the adults in that facility had no place to go, if you go there, you will see big men and women with disabilities. You know, Madam Deputy Speaker, you were minister. You have big men and women in that facility with children because there's no place for the adults with disabilities to go. And that's only a small fraction, but the truth is, even though mentally a person may not be developed, at 20, 25, your body is developed. And there's some things that children should not see. And that we really need to be able to separate those adults from the children. And this is an important, important move, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a significant stride in this country, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, of course, there are a number of persons who wonder and who worry that if something should happen to them, what is going to happen to my child? These are the things that we were voted in to do. And I am pleased that at this time I have the opportunity to be able to deliver on some of these things. I was going to go through some of the things in the draft bill, but I will not do that because I intend to be back here. Madam Deputy Speaker, permit me to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, young Senator Andwele, and young Janelle, I intend to be back here by the end of December. I am very serious, you know. And that we must be laying this legislation. I would like to lay it on December 3rd and hopefully debate it in the month of December. But we have to be able, yes, to lay this legislation and to say that what we say we're going to do. There's plenty of slip, they say, between the cup and the lip. So today we say, and tomorrow we are going to do it. And there are a number of things you will see from all the different areas of omnibus legislation. So it speaks of health, it speaks of transport, and it's committing the country to doing certain things in the way the Prime Minister asked for us to commit the country. So even when we leave this place, whoever comes after us is still committed to deliver on these things. And my only suggestion is that we have those meetings with persons in the private sector so that the private sector knows how we feel. And that the private sector understands that we feel so strongly about this that we intend to do it. And that while we do not want to spend our time talking about penalties and so on and so forth, we can come to common understanding through a voluntary compliance kind of arrangement, but that we intend to do this. Because people got to eat. People have to eat in this country. Everybody. Madam Deputy Speaker. And so I will reserve my other 20 pages of notes for the debate that will follow soon after. But I really want to close again by thanking my colleagues. I feel so proud of the way every one of them spoke. I want to thank them for the support. I want to advise the public that what they see here is not a performance, because these conversations occur in cabinet. These conversations occur on WhatsApp. I can message my colleagues on these most important matters. These are important things for this government. These are important things for this country. I want to thank my colleagues, but I really want to close by thanking the community of persons with disabilities. And I do not know if I, as I said before, could have had the grace that you have had, having had to endure what you have had to endure in this country. But believe me, weeping endures for a night, and joy shall come in the morning. Madam Deputy Speaker, with those few words, I move that this resolution be now passed.
The question is that this resolution now do pass. Honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Resolution.
Good afternoon, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've come to the end of today's sitting, and I now move that we adjourn this Honourable Chamber to the Tuesday, the 19th of November at 10 a.m.
Question is that this chamber, this sitting be adjourned until Tuesday,
19th.
the 19th of November, 2024 at 10 a.m. in the morning. All honourable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This chamber now stands adjourned.